am I supposed to? Uh, no,
So,
I'm the
if it
speaker.
is okay with you, I'll just give a brief introduction to our participants about all
Yeah,
our.
I would. I thought I was just chairing.
You are presiding the session, sir.
Yeah. So I'll. Okay, you can give Arpan up. You can give the. Uh,
If
yeah.
you allow, I would give.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you
Please.
can.
No. No. Please start.
Thank you so much, sir. So, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Arpan Preet Kaur, and on the behalf of Indian Research Scholar Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you all in this online book discussion on Gramsci and South Asia, Common Sense, Religion, and Political Society. Thank you all for joining us today for what promises to be a rich and stimulating conversation around a book that brings together Gramscian political theory with the question of common sense, political society, and South Asian context. It is an honor for us that this session is being presided over by Professor Rajeev Bhargava. Professor Bhargava is truly a name that needs no introduction. Most of us here have at some point in our academic journeys encountered with his writings on political theory, secularism, constitutionalism, and democracy. He has been associated with leading institutions such as JNU and CSDS, where he has always also served as director. And he has held various visiting positions at universities, including Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia. So let me now introduce the author of our book, Professor Arun Kumar Patnaik. He is of political science at University of Hyderabad. Professor Patnaik is a distinguished scholar of political theory and IR and holds expertise in political theory and political economy development. He is currently working as professor of political science at University of Hyderabad. His long-standing engagement with critical theory and Gramscian thought makes him especially well placed to write the book like Gramsci and South Asia, which we will be discussing today. We also have with us our panelists for today's discussion. We are delighted to have Professor Deepa Sreenivas ma'am, professor at Center for Women's Study at University of Hyderabad, whose areas of research include popular graphic culture and masculinities, feminist pedagogy, gender and childhood studies, and feminist political theory. Due to some reason, our another panelist, Professor Anil sir, will not be able to join us in today's session. So we are delighted to have such a distinguished author and panel and the presiding chair of the session with us today. So once again, a very warm welcome to all the participants and our dignitaries. I now invite Professor Bhargav to lead the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Arpan Preet. First of all, my apologies for not turning up on time, but I was genuinely confused and misinformed. So let me quickly begin with my own sort of brief understanding of Gramsci and who is a real hero for Arun. He's been engaged with Gramsci's thought for nearly 40 years, and he knows his work much better than I do. But I still remember the excitement with which I read Gramsci, and I communicated some of his ideas to my students way back in 1980, 81, 82. And the one thing that I clearly remember about Gramsci is, and that is something which I'm sure all of you must be very familiar with, and Arun's work has contributed to enriching and expanding that notion. That is Gramsci's idea that the ruling elite, if it has to rule in a more enduring manner, uh, if it has to rule consistently over a long period of time, there is no way that it can do so by force or by sheer domination. Uh, it has to rule by by consent in some ways, and this consent cannot be obtained uh, unless the central and key ideas, which are really decisively in favor of the ruling class, are also uh, expressed and articulated in a manner in which, uh, in a way, that would also appeal to the classes over which this rule is exercised. Uh, so the articulation of a vision by the ruling elites, which will somehow incorporate the interests of those who are ruled in a manner in which, in a manner such that those interests do not challenge the the uh, the most fundamental interest of the ruling elite, but which somehow uh, are presented, and not just presented, but really formulated in a manner that is fundamental. That is the only way in which this consent can be obtained. It is in some ways longer lasting. Doesn't this, then one will either and understand how a particular social relation can manage to uh, to remain in power. So this this articulation of the vision is something which is done intellectually by a lot of intellectual work. It's an ideological work, and the ruling class therefore has to provide a certain kind of leadership to the rest. And unless those who are in a very fundamental sense oppressed and subjugated, unless they do not realize the mechanisms of this ideological kind of supremacy, they will neither be able to displace the ruling class nor be able to take over the rule themselves. And this is, of course, Gramsci's classical theory of hegemony. So the whole idea that you can rule, of course, you can rule over a long period of time by sheer control, by force, by brutal exercise of power, merely by law. That is a serious misunderstanding, a failure to understand how by how sustained political power is actually exercised. You'll always end up in a position of defeat. So both to understand political exercise, political power, and to understand all of this is something which is dependent upon understanding the nuances and subtleties of how ideological hegemony and some kind of leadership, even moral leadership, is 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 uh, is uh, uh, how it takes place in society, and that is something which is central to the Gramscian idea, and so this idea, which of course has fascinated Arun, of the battle over common sense, that is crucial to this notion of ideological hegemony, and this of course brings us to religion, in particularly in South Asia, because a lot of this constitution of ideological hegemony is takes place through not by social science theory or by a scientific natural science outlook, but through religious cosmologies, either through belief or through practice. And this was certainly how the ruling classes ruled, unlike classical understandings of feudalism, where it was believed that state there is a lot of reliance on brute power for how the feudal classes kind of held power over the others. I would say that if one was to use this Gramscian notion, we'll have to understand how Christianity and social institutions, even when they had not very close links with the state, with the feudal state, and its in its kind of ancillaries. We've got to understand the function of Christianity in the exercise of power in the past. Actually, even today, in a lot of societies, this continues to be so, even though this is not very visible. But particularly in South Asia, where religion is less a matter of belief, but more a question of practices, I think religion has a very important role to play in shaping the common sense and in sustaining the hegemony of the ruling elites, not just political but also social elites. It's extremely important to understand the way religion comes into play. I must confess that I'm completely ill-prepared for this session, and I haven't even properly had a look at Arun's work closely in recent times. It's been a long time since, but I think with these introductory remarks, I invite and hopefully they will sort of give an impetus to everybody to start expressing their views on both Gramsci and Arun's important work. May I now invite Deepa, Sreenivas to say a few words on this.
Thank you, Professor Bhargav. And Let me begin by thanking the Indian Research Scholars Association for inviting me to speak on the book. Thank you, Vikash. Thank you, Arpan. Am I the only panelist as of now? Looks like that. Yeah. So I must confess that I'm a bit terrified I've been reviewing or threatening to review this book for the longest time. But as all our lives are, I keep going back to the book and then, I'm dragged into something else. First of all, I feel that I need to, although you have invited me, I need to justify my presence here. Arpan said that I worked on popular graphic culture, and if we expand it, that would be popular culture. I look at cinema, I've looked at Amar Chitrakatha. And when Professor Bhargava was speaking, I was also thinking that when I started my research on Amar Chitrakatha, there's no way I could actually engage with it with a theory of top-down domination. So coming from a background of cultural studies, the idea of hegemony was very, very useful for me. And looking at, like all young people at one point of time, I was very taken up with the idea of the bourgeois dominating and the theory of total domination, if there is any such thing. But then I started looking at popular culture as the site where the battle for consent, the battle for hegemony is continuously fought. So it is not something that is a done deal at any point. There is, and since it is a continuous battle, there's always scope for resistance. So not really, let me just also put it out there that I'm not from a background that would help me or that would help me to engage with many of the concepts that Professor Patnaik highlights and engages with the kind of skill that I would like. I am here, so let me try and put out some of my thoughts out there for you all. And the book is called Gramsci and South Asia, Common Sense, Religion and Political Society. For some reason, it's stuck in my head, Gramsci in South Asia. And I do believe that it's not just a mistake. There is a Freudian, maybe, undercurrent to it, because Professor Patnaik brings it so much into the South Asian context. So I'll just read out some of the points to save time and also not to meander. So I believe this book is an ambitious methodological and sociological project, definitely in India. The decolonization of Antonio Gramsci's theoretical framework to analyze the specific historical and cultural contours of post-colonial India. By navigating between what he terms empty concepts and filled concepts, which are more historical specificities, Professor Patnaik attempts to bridge the gap between Western Marxist theory and South Asian social imaginary. And now probably you will understand and forgive me if I remember the title of this book as Gramsci in South Asia, not as Gramsci and South Asia. While the book offers a sophisticated defense of dialogic secularism, there are times when it pushed me to also think about the irreconcilability or the tension between assimilationist pursuits with the contingencies of subaltern claims and deep-seated structural asymmetries of power. And I hope as I speak, what I'm trying to say would be slightly clearer. The first part of this discussion, review from my side, I look at the historicizing of the guru figure that Professor Patnaik does in his book. And I would say the methodology of Swaraj in ideas. Many of you would recognize K.C. Bhattacharya's Swaraj in ideas and the way the author engages with it. So the author begins by invoking K.C. Bhattacharya's Swaraj in ideas, choosing the assimilationist route to treat Gramsci as a real guru, whose ideas are accepted only after critical scrutiny, finds an affinity with our native genius, as in quotes. Now, so there has to be an endeavor to see where the affinity lies instead of just, a top-down application of Gramscian ideas. So Professor Patnaik positions his project in contrast to Aditya Nigam's strategy of, quote, epistemic delinking, unquote, which advocates for, quote, thinking across traditions, unquote, by treating Western sources as one among many rather than the universal yardstick of the modern. The author, Professor Patnaik, argues that decolonization need not be anti-West if it involves a dialectical engagement with the life and mind of the masses as envisioned by Bhattacharya. So this is a very, very new kind of concept for me to deal with. And as these were my thoughts. While Professor Patnaik sees a sovereign intellectual exercising the agency to choose which foreign ideals to adopt, and if there is indeed an affinity with our native genius, so it is not a mechanical process, and something for us to think about, because even in our universities, we are often, taught. I did political science also for a couple of years, or any other, like we are asked to adopt certain ideas without really thinking and just apply them. And this is something we resist even in my discipline of gender studies, that, you cannot just take an author or a thinker from the West and just apply it to the Indian context as if it would solve all our problems, irrespective of the radicalism that author or thinker might represent elsewhere. So, but yet I was thinking for a minute, because, Hans Fanon, I was a thinker, of one of the key figures of post-colonial thinking, decolonial thinking, Frantz Fanon, came to my mind. A Fanonian reading suggests that the very act of seeking validation from a Western guru risks reinscribing a colonized psyche. Furthermore, the metaphor of the guru, and this probably I'm coming from my own background of looking at Amar Chitrakatha and its gurus. So the metaphor of the guru stands in tension with the subaltern subject, with the subaltern project. In the Indian context, the guru often represents a traditional Brahminical hierarchy of specialized knowledge that maintains social distance. So there is a certain historical charge with which the guru figure comes. In contrast, the organic intellectual that Gramsci theorizes acts as a figure of radical immanence, one who does not assimilate theory from above, but generates it by actively connecting intellectual knowledge with the spontaneous feelings of the masses. Now, this is an inherently tricky task for the progressive intellectual who cannot simply borrow from the existing stock of common sense. Unlike the traditional or the conservative reliance on inherited traditions, I don't want to call it prejudice, but inherited traditions, the organic intellectual must perform a very difficult, arduous task of building a bridge from the subaltern's double consciousness towards a transformative good sense. This brings me to common sense and the way it is, the certain illuminating ways in which the author brings us back to the Gramscian concept of common sense and civil society. I would think that the book's core sociological contribution is its focus on common sense, something that we are so used to disregard. And it's very heartening for me because sometimes, and I'm not from history, but people say, why do you give so much importance to popular history or Amar Chitragatha? It's not even true. It's not historically tenable. And this is something that the history of representation, the history of the moment, or the rationale for the production or the dissemination of Amar Chitragatha is something that I take so very seriously. That I take popular common sense seriously, something that the questioning puts me on back foot, and I'm always looking for the ways in which I might address that question. So hence here we do have a lot of, shared probably concerns. So the the book looks at common sense as a fragmented but foundational social imaginary. It argues that the subaltern possesses a double consciousness, one that is verbal and passive, and the other that is practical and active, and that the task of the intellectual is to synthesize the subaltern's feeling with knowing. While this argument focuses on large-scale political resistance, and that is something which I feel is very important, coming from a cultural theorist's background, I'm also thinking that a Foucauldian lens would point to the molecular and the capillary nature of power, which is most stable where it is most spontaneous. That is, it's almost invisible, and where it is decentralized, operating within the minute domestic details of the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom, the family, and caste-based socialities. So I do feel that one also needs to think about these domains and where power is molecular. In emphasizing the good sense that is found in folk traditions, one also needs to remain alert to how, and I think Professor Bhargava was talking about it, that how dominant patriarchal and Brahminical elites selectively re-articulate specific elements from the sedimented inventory of common sense. And here I'm drawing from Stuart Hall, a very well-known cultural theorist. So I think it helps to think that this is never a finished project. There is always a chance that this might again get re-articulated in a more dominant kind of configuration. And through this discursive realignment, micro spaces of power may effectively domesticate subaltern resistance long before it reaches the level of national popular movement, suggesting, and this is where I again have a slight, what should I say, slight, I'm not getting the word, but I'm slightly wondering how one might look at the guru figure. It's not exactly a critique, but maybe a little bit of problematization is necessary. So I'm saying that there is a possibility of this being drawn back into a realigned dominant discourse. And so that would suggest that a purely pedagogical intervention might actually leave the underlying capillary structures of domination untouched. So I'm basically trying to foreground this as a possible risk. I'm coming to one particular event in our nation's history, contemporary history, that Professor Patnaik engages with. A pivotal moment in this analysis is the legal trajectory culminating in the 2019 Supreme Court verdict. Again, I must warn you that this is something that I need to read with more care. But as of now, just to open up the discussion. So there's a distinction between the 2010 High Court judgment, which is lauded as a model of mutual sacrifice and shared sovereignty, and the 2019 judgment verdict, which the author interprets as an act of remedial justice. By prioritizing the evidence of faith found in the religious common sense of devotees over strict property titles, the author argues that the Supreme Court actually moved toward a form of pragmatic closure, one that sought to heal historical wounds by validating the intrinsic faith of the Hindu majority, while reinstating the institutional rights of Muslims through land allocation. So while the book posits this as a necessary engagement with to go back to Bhattacharya, the native genius of popular consciousness, and I definitely recognize something there and something that we haven't probably, in the sense, let me bring out what I'm trying to say here and why this is an important argument for me, that very often when we have focused on archaeological evidence, empirical evidence, historical evidence, one has also, in the history of modern post-independent India, has not engaged enough with religious common sense. And so many of the wounds remain just beneath the surface. And so that's something I want to put it out there to say why it resonates with me. However, there's again a risk that I want to point out while this is posited as a necessary engagement with native genius that I just said of popular consciousness, if one were to bring out a counter perspective, such as Ratna Kapoor's 2024 analysis, it points to a dynamic akin to what Elizabeth Povinelli, some of you might have read her, calls the cunning of recognition. So you recognize a problem, but there's a cunning underlying it. Kapoor suggests, that is Ratna Kapoor suggests, that the court's claim to procedural neutrality may inadvertently function as a mask for a majoritarian project, which is why the cunning, one that disciplines religious identity to serve a modernist nationalist script and risks marginalizing. So there's a risk. It is exhilarating that someone actually is willing to, leap beyond archaeological or historical evidence and look at popular religious common sense. But the risk is that there's a risk of marginalizing the very subaltern imaginaries that the dialogue seeks to protect. Now I'll come to I'll come to a chapter that is a personal favorite in many ways. So this is about the bowels of Bengal and the politics of representation. This is where actually Professor Patnaik explores the thick of popular culture, so to the heart of popular culture, so to speak, and hence, it is after my heart also. Now, in search for a positive secularism that transcends the sterile boundaries of state, the book turns to the syncretic religious worlds of the bowels of Bengal. As several scholars have also highlighted, Bengal has a centuries-old history in which popular religions practiced by the bowels, by the Kartabajas, and fakirs emerged to interrogate Brahminical and Islamic orthodoxies. So that's something that we have read before, and the book actually brings it out in a very luminous way. So Professor Patnaik identifies the little tradition, in this little tradition of the bowels, a profound religious humanism that historically facilitated social and spatial mobility across hardened communal boundaries. And I think this is a big contribution of the book, that it kind of takes us back to that past of where another kind of secularism was possible. And I think in this current moment, it's important that we remember that past. So he, for instance, views the Bowles philosophy of Vartaman Panthi, or presentism, and the impersonal God as a site of spiritual democracy. A space where the subaltern rejects birth-based pride in favor of an inclusive heart-to-heart contact. Okay, so in that sense, I really mean it when I said that this whole idea of spiritual democracy is something that we need in the present, and the book actually brings it into the contemporary dialogue, something that we need to push. However, this recovery must also account for the ways in which, and here I'm also, again, every time I'm saying that this is something we need to protect, but there is also a risk. And that's something I'm trying to, because it is a precious moment in history, and which is why it is all the more important to underscore the risk. And this recovery must also account for the ways in which popular traditions are appropriated, sanitized, or drawn into dominant articulations. And I think some of you would agree that we see that unfolding before our eyes today also. Maybe today more than ever. As Professor Patnaik very sharply observes, there's a telling ideological void in Tagore's appreciation of the bowels. He celebrated their abstract God and spiritual freedom, but remained silent on the parallel Namasudra movement demanding political freedom through temple entry. Now, this omission reveals a Bhadralok preference for a safe, aestheticized dissent over the confrontational politics of assertion. One can cite maybe Dalit assertion today. While the Bowles practiced a lower class caste religious radicalism that mocked the pedantry of the elite, such virile socially religious radicalism, virile socially critical urban folk culture faced a process of silencing as the elite middle class, influenced by Victorian moral values marginalize these popular forms. This is not my argument. Many of you would have read Shumanto Banerjee's 1989 classic, The Parlour in the Street, and I'm drawing from there. As wandering mendicants who renounced the formal observance of caste and granted women equal status, the Bowls offered a lit reform that went far beyond the intellectual debates of 19th century Bhadralok. Yet, by the turn of the 20th century, the authentic, earthy social protest of the Bowls was often distorted or appropriated by an elite-dominated commercial entertainment industry, illustrating the tension between the subaltern's radical good sense and the dominant society's tendency to sanitize the very traditions it purports to celebrate. Vikash, I have another 5 minutes. Arpan, you, whoever.
I can't interfere anything.
Okay, sorry.
Deepa, please go ahead. Take your,
Yeah.
because Anil is not here.
Yeah,
So
I'm
we have
almost
more time.
done. I'm just
Carry
coming
on,
to the.
carry on,
yeah.
please.
The chapter on Kandamal, and where he talks about, the 2007-2008 Kandamal riots, it presents, the analysis of the 2007-2008 Kandamal riots presents a social dialogue model where public confessions function as a Gandhian broom to sweep away communal hatred, theoretically allowing Adivasis and Dalit Christians to forge a new historic bloc based on mutual sacrifice. So this is again in the book kind of time and again brings us back to what to a politics of possibility, or what is possible through dialogue. And for me personally, like I said, not just through the dominance of facts. So it's like, what might a dialogue achieve in the most contentious environment? So, and also mutual sacrifice. Again, a counter perspective indicates that the violence was rooted less in a crisis of consciousness, although, and more in deep-seated socioeconomic and socioeconomic competition over the scheduled ST status and land rights. This is something, again, that I read on the Kandamal riots, and something that one probably needs to think more about. Within this context, the confessions associated with reconciliation are problematized by there have been reports of Hindu nationalist groups using rituals like Raksha Bandhan, accepting coercively, forcibly tying Rakhis on Christians in a proprietary gesture to claim them into the fold. So, the only little question that I want to put there is that which appears to be a spontaneous reconciliation also carries the dimensions of a tactical surrender. So there is a power imbalance, a structural imbalance of power. So the spontaneous is not completely spontaneous, but there are certain underlying tensions and pressures, and probably there is a tactical surrender. So while the dialogic model offers an ethically profound, and I think it is also an aspirational pathway for peace, there is an inherent risk in underestimating how to underestimate. I'm not saying this analysis, but something that I'm reminding myself that one needs to also be alert to how dominant social imaginary can be often weaponized to pacify rather than liberate some radicalism. Professor Patnaik has produced a vital work that forces a necessary rethinking of the secular religious divide in South Asia, By choosing an assimilation route that prioritizes the pedagogical transformation of consciousness, the book offers a powerful vision of how theory might finally breathe through the life and mind of the masses. And if we were to re-articulate it through a Gramscian vocabulary, I would say by taking seriously the popular common sense of the masses. Ultimately, to my mind, the book's enduring value lies in its courageous and honest admission of the voids in the secular imaginary. By proposing a path towards spiritual democracy, it opens a site for productive contestation where the hope for a more inclusive social imaginary can finally challenge the historical reality of majoritarian disciplining. Ultimately, Gramsci and South Asia offers a compelling, if somewhat at points utopic, idealist, but we do need utopias in moments of dystopia, offers a compelling, if optimistic, roadmap for the organic intellectual to sift through the contradictory common sense of the masses and recover the good sense necessary for new hegemony. And that's where I will end. I would say that Professor Patnaik's dialogue is ethically necessary, but sometimes without a structural safeguard against the cunning of recognition that I referred to before, there are certain inherent risks that one might want to take note of. That's where I'll end. Thank you, Professor Bhargava.
Thank you, Deepa. Thanks a lot. Arun, is that you next?
Yeah, thank you. Nobody there, so I have to start that initiate. How much time I have?
You have 20 minutes. Is that?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Vikas, for inviting me in this forum. Thank you, Professor Rajeev, for coming, and Deepa also offering a very veiled criticism of my work. And that's part of dialogue anyway. One of the things which impressed me about Gramsci is that like nobody else in the world of Marxism in 20th century, only Gramsci stands as an outstanding thinker who is interested in dialogue. That has actually propelled me to think of the magic of dialogue. Because as Renate Holub, she teaches in New School, social research. She says in a famous book, Marxism and Postmodernism, Gramsci Beyond Marxism Postmodernism, she argues that only Gramsci in 20th century is interested in dialogue, especially in the Marxist fold. Left, there is no other thinker who is interested in dialogue, and with Gramsci, any dialogue is possible. This is an interesting point she makes. So I was wondering where Marxism has gone wrong. Because the whole book is in a way a criticism of the kind of Marxism we practice in India. I would have written it clearly, but publishers were reluctant. And so I had to make it more implicit, more veiled. So it is essentially a dialogue within the left, the kind of thing which I proposed here. And I'm sure all dialogue, like all dialogue, my dialogues also could be incomplete. I could run risk, as Deepa said quite well. But question is, dialogue is not happening. Therefore, it is necessary to take risk. To have a dialogue today is a risky business. Hardly dialogues take place between political parties. Look at the duologue taking place in parliament. There is hardly any constitutional morality being followed by any one of them. And therefore, in this scenario, necessary for us to examine why Indian history, which is filled with various kinds of dialogue between Buddha and Angulimala, the Daku, and dialogue between JP and Lakshman Singh, the Daku, and so on and so forth, and why civilized political parties are debating. They are not Dakus. Yet they are debating, they are quarreling, they are fighting. There is hardly any meeting point. They are hardly trying to reconcile with each other. They are hardly trying to learn from each other. Dialogue involves all that. What has gone wrong with us? And why we are all the time trying to pinprick, trying to pigeonhole, trying to criticize, trying to find loopholes, not the strength of our enemies. I am quite surprised, I am amazed by lack of intellectual rigor here. This is where Gramsci is interesting for me. The Gramsci argues that one of the fundamental mistakes of the left is that they confuse between political criticism and ideological criticism. These two are not one and same. Left has erred, left has conflated these two. In ideological criticism, Gramsci continues, the task is to recover the strength of the enemy. Remember the enemy, I am referring to Gramsci again. Strength of your enemy. Have you done it? Therefore, you are not offering ideological criticism. Therefore, you are trying to run the enemy down by offering only political criticism. The task, on the other hand, the task of political criticism is to expose limits of the enemy. But when you don't do it, you are constructing a binary between yourself and the enemy. This binary is something which this book is essentially trying to confront. Book is essentially trying to break this binary. I might have failed. Probably Deepa showed it one chapter. But I am willing to admit those failings. The question is, the task is to do this. Task is to offer, learn from the strength of the enemy while criticizing the enemy. That's what the distinction between ideological criticism and political criticism all about. This is a beautiful distinction Gramsci offers. Yet political theories in India have paid hardly any attention to these ideas. They have not applied those ideas to concrete projects with which you confront. Not merely India, across the world. I mean, the Gramscian ideas are deeply relevant. In the West, you find this problem. In India, you find this problem. Throughout Latin American countries, you find this problem. Problem is we are trying to criticize the enemy all the time, not learn from its strength. Therefore, we are conflating ideology with politics. This is an interesting distinction Gramsci has done. The book is actually about this. And one reason why I was interested in dialogue is that Gramsci argues that the nation's intellectuals should learn from the social imaginary. I'm using Taylor's concept, social imaginary of non-intellectuals. Unlike Taylor, Gramsci offers an interesting classification of what Taylor calls social imaginary. Social imaginary is a pre-theoretical background or pre-philosophical background consciousness, which the philosophy must try to engage with. That's what Taylor says. Gramsci says similar thing in a different way. Gramsci agrees that if you take a pre-theoretical background or pre-philosophical background, you'll find 5 different things in social imaginary. 1, religious common sense. First, common sense. Religious and non-religious. Second, religious common sense. Third, folk religion. 4, religion of people. 5, religion of intellect. Official religion or dogmatic religion or orthodox religion. All these forms of consciousness are pre-theoretical. Gramsci is atheist. Unlike Taylor, he is atheist. So for him, all these forms of consciousness, which are part of social imaginary for Taylor, are essentially pre-theoretical. And unless intellectual task, which is highly political and highly theoretical, highly rational, tries to have dialogue with all these forms, dialogue with subalterns is not possible. Therefore, dialogue with subaltern for Gramsci is critical and very important for him. Unlike there's a difference here between the way Gramsci uses common sense, the way Taylor uses social imaginary. Since Rajeev Bhargava is present, I would like to, because he's a big fan of Taylor, and I am also a big fan of Taylor for this. But the difference is, in the Taylor social imaginary is actually posited outside the theoretical corpus. Theory engages with that from outside. But in case of Gramsci, theory is immanent in social imaginary. Theory has to evolve from within. The theory is formed in dialogue with social imaginary, not from outside it. That is Taylor. Rajeev should correct me if I am wrong. Though, like Gramsci, Taylor also argues that social imaginary is full of contradictions, and there should be something in social imaginary theory to be legitimate, to be driven by society. Theory must incorporate elements of common sense, elements of religion, so on and so forth. Taylor argues quite vividly. But unlike Taylor, Gramsci makes his point clear. The theory formation, or theory is a practical formation, theory is about a philosophy of praxis for him, cannot be formed without dialogue. It can't be simply formed by a group of intellectuals in the party, in the vanguard circle, and they develop a theory, they assimilate things in common sense. That's not possible. It should be done in practice. Therefore, the dialogue between theory and theory formation and common sense has to be practical dimension. It has to be done in practice. It cannot be done in theory. Therefore, you can't simply connect with common sense in an outside environment and say that we are transferring some ideas and common sense to theory. That's while that is possible, it will remain alienated. It will remain elitist. Therefore, for Gramsci, it is interesting that theoretical task has to be carried out in practical engagement with subaltern common sense, or what I said, what Taylor calls social imaginary. As I said, 5 forms of this is important thing. And when I found literature on this, I found many people are critical of Gramsci for this. For example, the Deepa Chakravarti argues that Gramsci's Marxism is dialogic Marxism. He is genuinely interested in dialogue. However, he fails to understand subaltern common sense of state. For him, totalizing theory of state has to be imported from outside. But that's not correct. Gramsci quite clearly argues that subaltern common sense of state is full of contradictions. There are something subalterns know about state. The local state is better known to subaltern common sense, but the national state or the central state, the character of macro state may not be known to subaltern common sense. Therefore, Gramsci argues that it is necessary for us to have a complex theory of common sense that, unlike Gramsci, Deepa Chakravarti tries to flatten that distinction in common sense having good sense, and common sense having inherited consciousness, as Deepa said, or what Gramsci would say, prejudices or traditional conservative. Therefore, this contradiction is essential for Gramsci. Deepa Chakravarti doesn't pay attention to that. For Gramsci, even as I've said earlier in this chapter 2, I argued that Gramsci never argues for totalizing theory of consciousness. Or similarly, he never defends the totalizing theory of state. Deepa Chakravarti misconstructs that idea. Gramsci doesn't construct that. So, Partha simply dismisses common sense, says that now in Foucauldian governmentality, common sense or subaltern consciousness is redundant because governmentality dominates consciousness so much. Subalterns are caught up with governmental power. That's partly true, partly not true. So there is a contestation goes on between government and subaltern consciousness. There is also co-option and compromise, complicity. This dual form of consciousness or diachronic form of consciousness is very significantly present in today's society. Gramsci tries to argue that. Gramsci, one beautiful thing about Gramsci is essentially offers a diachronic reading of every situation, every event, every hegemony. Is not simply consent, is based coercion. It's not simply coercion, but also consent. This diachrony is part of Gramsci's life. He presents several varieties of diachrony in hegemony. I will not go into the details. The point is this Gramscian diachronic reading of situation has not been understood by the left, by and large. I'm not talking about left-wing intellectuals. I'm talking about the communist parties. And by and large, they fail to understand this. They fail to present, they gave only one-sided picture of thing, either supported Gramsci or criticized Gramsci. Result was this one-sided thinking, which is what we are taught by our gurus like Rajeev Bhargava and Suvita Kaviraj. I remain critical. No social theory, no political theory is possible with one-sided thinking. It's true that you may be a sophisticated theoretician, but one-sided approach to everything that you try to present, you will try to distort things. You will try to present a singular viewpoint of thing which is helpful partially, not helpful by and large. So, and you said guru. I would call Rajeev Bhargava my guru. And in this book, you didn't say. I refer to his theory of political secularism heavily. Heavily, I use, and that has inspired me to interrogate the nature of political secularism in India's context, and offer a critique of political secularism by using his theoretical exposition of the distinctiveness of Indian secularism, and I applied this concept quite heavily. Therefore, I call him as my guru. Actually, really my guru. He taught me, but also he is intellectual my guru. The project intellectual secularism, which he has evolved after I left JNU. Therefore, I continue to think of him as my guru. Point is, this guru tradition can be seen metaphorically differently. Whereas Fanon presented one dimension of guru, which is right partly. But I think if you connect with the guru critically, creatively, by adding new things to his or her corpus, that's another positive tradition of guru, which Keshav uses that. Keshav uses guru in a positive sense. Fanon is right in his own way. I don't discount that, but people are using guru uncritically, both intellectually and in a spiritual life. But people also use connect with gurus critically. Now and then I may be critical of Rajeev Bhargava, Sutta Kaviraj, and they may be also fond of me for criticizing them, because the disciples are criticizing the gurus. The point is this connection again is again positive, and that's part of our dialogic tradition with guru and disciple. That is again part of India's history and so on and so forth. Well, the point is, and there is no risk involved here. Because we are interested in dialogue, therefore there is no risk involved here. Point is, not having dialogue is a big risk in Indian context. That is my summation. And about Supreme Court, you said interesting things. I will not go into that, but basically my summation is that I would have personally preferred High Court reconciliation. High Court gave a better model of reconciliation and asked for sacrifice of various communities and asked to compromise. That model of reconciliation, in my view, are respectful of different kinds of religious consciousness. Religious, for example, Hindus believe in, by and large, the dominant religious common sense. Hindus about temple form of worship. Other form of consciousness is not dominant. The temple form of consciousness is dominant in the tradition. And similarly, Muslims believe in mosque as a dominant religious common sense. But point is, unlike Hindus, Muslims believe in site of worship and congregational activity. Therefore, it is a part of a neighborhood religion. Whereas Hindus can have temples anywhere, on the hilltop, bottom of the hill, on the riverside, on the here and there. Many parts of do you find a mosque on hilltop? Do you find a church on hilltop? You may find in Kandhamal, where tribes stay there. But you don't find a mosque, and this is a point Supreme Court neglected. I am critical of Supreme Court for that. I made a veiled criticism of that. You didn't refer, but point is at least is something is better than nothing. He gave a historical injustice, tried to reconcile things. I think that reconciliation could have been much better if Supreme Court had followed the idea of difference in religious common sense of Hindus on the one hand and religious common sense of Muslims on the other hand, because these two religious common sense are not one and same. Supreme Court flattened the difference. That's where I'm critical. I think that they took in my view, is objectionable, because you are treating Muslims on par with Hindus. You can't treat Muslim common sense as part of Hindu common sense. Hindu common sense is different from Muslim common sense. Supreme Court didn't pay attention to that. However, the idea of mosque is part of common sense. Therefore, I, in my view, I should say I qualified my appreciation of Supreme Court. I must say, by several qualifiers I added. And I said, okay, something is better than nothing. In my view, that's slightly better and better than nothing. I mean, having a protracted conflict over 70 years, because of legal path secular forces followed, the conflict, look at the history of conflict. It has started from Sipai mutiny and gone ahead, and not well Sipai mutiny. Remember, the Jesuit priest documented, says that Hindus do parikrama or Rama Navami Day in 18th century. Forget Sipai Mutiny, 19th century. 18th century, see, he documented, says that Hindus do parikrama around Babri Masjid, thinking that Ram was born here. There is no RSS, no BJP, no Jansang at that time. Late 19th century, late 18th century. Where was Jansang? Where was BJP? Where was RSS? Where was ideological manufacturing of prejudices? No ideological penetration. The conflict began from that historical part. Supreme Court meddled and tried to settle it in a way which is not very satisfactory for me as well. But I won't say it is majoritarian. I would restrain myself. I would say I would be critical of it for undermining Muslim religious common sense. I would like to criticize them for not respecting, for giving one reconciliation, bypassing another reconciliation offered by High Court. Supreme Court, if you remember carefully, they said that High Court model reconciliation not asked by parties. Then which party asked for reconciliation the Supreme Court offered? Is it not double standard? On the one hand, you are criticizing High Court for offering a model of reconciliation not asked by parties. On the other hand, you are offering a model of reconciliation not asked by parties. Then what kind of judgment is this? Therefore, this is a flawed judgment, and many morally and politically as well. And moreover, but point is, it respected some elements of common sense and brought some aspects of some elementary reconciliation model, which is not very satisfactory from my point of view. I am sure others would also, but I won't call it majoritarian. But because it does recognize the need for mosque. Simple matter. Respecting mosque somewhere else, distant spot, was filtered with majoritarian view. But the idea they also compromise with, in my view, they compromise with majoritarian ideological forces. They located mosque in a distant spot. They said mosque must be built, but they asked state government, central government to construct a mosque, which is anti-majoritarian anyway. But they said the mosque can be built anywhere. That's again pandering to majoritarian psychology. Therefore, there is a complexity in this thing. You cannot simply call simply majoritarian stance. That's slightly unfair. But you can't say that there are majoritarian tendencies in this, because Supreme Court tried to view religious common sense of Muslims through Hindu lenses. Therefore, there is a majoritarian tendency. I agree. And similarly, they located mosque at a distant spot, which panders to those who do Ram Parikrama nearby, the majoritarian forces. Therefore, there is a majoritarian tendency again. Within that, it is necessary to see contradiction in Supreme Court judgment, rather than simply say as majoritarian or anti-Muslim or this, that. That is slightly unfair to fairness and criticism. That's what I expect.
Okay.
And
Arun,
5 minutes.
Maybe we have about half an hour. So I have a couple of questions. And then maybe we can have a discussion with everybody. So if you have, maybe you can wind up in a few minutes.
I'll just 5 minutes. I'll say why dialogue with subaltern necessary. I say dialogue with subaltern necessary in all the spheres, but I will say one interesting point which I encountered as a member of Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberty Committee. Myself and Professor Gopal, who was vice president, Kanaviran was president, Balgopal was secretary. We all, Kanaviran didn't come to that meeting, so we three went to inaugurate a district committee of Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberty Committee in Angul town, close to Chennai. So there we met, Gopal myself met about 30 rickshaw pullers. They are from the A.K. Gopalan Center, headed by CPM. And they meet there, they discuss there. They are from different political parties. Some are from CPI, some from CPM, some from CPML. Cluster of rickshaw pullers. And the casual workers, they all come together in CPM office and meet once a week, especially Sunday, and discuss the party's journal called Prajashakti. And that has been going on for the last 30 years. So there was dialogue between Hargopal and Kistea, to be named as Kistea. One of the leader of this group is name is Kistea. The interesting dialogue between them. Kiste was asking Bhargava, what is the future of socialism in China? Whether I'm talking of 1995, so socialism already collapsed in various parts of the world. So what is future of socialism in this part of the world? China, Vietnam, Cuba. He was asking all these questions. Why it collapsed in Eastern Europe? Why it collapsed in? Can it revive in Poland and Moscow? So all these interesting questions he was asking. So I was slightly enamored. I said, and they said interesting things. Said, sir, whatever Balgopal said, he's a top activist, top intellectual. We could not understand anything. Whatever you said, we understood everything. So I was slightly surprised that activist is not able to communicate to subalterns, whereas a professional intellectual like B or Gopal, he is communicating to subalterns. So what has gone wrong with activists? What is the language you are following? I was already wondering this question. Then when he came with this large number of voluminous questions, I was still disturbed. Then I asked him, I said, how did you learn all this? How do you know all this? Then he said, sir, we are coming to CPM office. We ask party leaders to discuss Prajasakti. They narrate news items of Prajasakti. And Prajasakti is a Telugu weekly of CPM. There's actually like People's Democracy for English readers. It's called Prajasakti. So People's Power. And so, therefore, leaders try to explain that Sunday's features, and that's how we came to know. And I said, but how many years is going on? They said, we've been doing this for the last 30 years. Then I said, but then I said, what is your family? Sorry, his family is very interesting. His family, he represents CPM. His son represents CPML. They are in the same family. That's interesting. And his wife is CPI. Interesting synthesis here. CPI, CPM, CPML, they are going together in the same family. I was surprised. That's beside the point. So then I said, but last 30 years you are dependent on the party leaders to know what is written in Prajasakti. Why didn't you ask them to teach you Telugu, to learn to read Prajasakti on your own? Then they gave a brilliant reply. That reply is stayed with me. 1995 reply stays. He says, sir, when they have time for us, they are so busy in ideological schisms and political fights. Only when we ask them to read Prajasakti, they tell us, do you think they have time for us? We have time for them. Now, they have no time to teach us Telugu. Therefore, we never learn Telugu. We are dependent on them. Look at the anguish you are saying. The old man expressing frustration. Here is a Communist Party not interested to teach people education. You are not teaching education. What kind of Communist Party? What kind of self-emancipation you are talking? What kind of whose emancipation you are trying to seek? You want the Christians' aspirations to be educated, to learn Telugu, have remained dormant these 30 years. 30 years of aspirations have not died. They remain dormant. They are not articulated by political organizations whose policy is to represent Christians' interests. That's all, not aspirations. Therefore, by representing material interests of Christians, aspirations of Christians are completely marginalized. Therefore, Gramsci's point is, if you don't connect with subaltern subjectivity, right or wrong, good or bad, good or inherited, good sense and inherited sense, if you don't connect with that, you will marginalize Christians' hope for education. Christians' hope for education still remain dormant. Therefore, this book. Thank you.
Thanks, Arun. I think it's extremely, the more I hear about it, the more I feel that this is actually a very, very important book, and it should be discussed more precisely because, as Deepa mentioned, you're willing to take risks. These are this kind of these kind of thoughts can be undertaken with a certain degree of openness, and that openness to others, including others who you kept calling them enemies. I was a little kind of uncomfortable with that term, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I think this requires a spirit, an adventurous spirit, and an openness of mind, and an openness to be influenced by others, which is a form, which is full of intellectual risks. And I think it's precisely because of that reason that we should take the book more seriously. I just wanted to ask a couple of things, and I'll link it to the issue of Baul, which is in your book and which is mentioned by Deepa as well. See, in India, we find two processes taking place between the so-called, in relation to the great and the so-called great and little traditions. I know that these categories have been superseded by other, but let's just continue to stick with them. So on the one hand, there is broadly what we call Sanskritization, which is really the incorporation, the assimilation of the lower culture into the cultures and culture of the upper castes. But there is also something which is happening in exactly the reverse way. For example, as you all know, Jagannath, or even earlier Shiva, these are all non-Brahminical gods. They're Adivasis or perhaps lower caste gods, and they get incorporated. They get integrated. They get articulated with the gods of the high traditions or the great traditions. Now, so both these processes are taking place, and this could not have taken place without some interaction whose basic structural form must be the form of a dialogue. Whether actual, dialogue in the sense in which we all understand dialogue today takes place or not is another issue. But there is a certain degree of openness and flexibility on both sides for this kind of fruitful interaction to take place, which is very different from, say, what is happening again in the West. The Protestant movement is all about a makeover of the lower traditions in the image of what the great traditions want. And there is some adjustment, there is some give and take, but by and large, the attempt is that what the elites do should now be available even to the masses, and everybody, the entire population, should be able to do what the elites had always done, right? And the distinction between the elites and the masses should break that distinction. But it's a one-way street. It's not a two-way street, unlike what happens in India. So I think, how do we cheer in terms, particularly in South Asia, when this is something, and yet at the end of it, and this is what is very interesting, at the end of it, these gods have become, upper Brahminical, they become part of a Brahminical discourse. I don't know, I don't know the details here, but Jagannath, for example, all the ethos of Jagannath temple is the ethos of a classic Brahminical culture. At least now, in the last many decades. So what has happened here? On the one hand, there was a certain openness whereby something that was not exclusively Brahminical, that was not Brahminical at all, became part of and was incorporated and made central in the Brahminical tradition. And then, which is completely reconfigured what is previously seen as purely Brahminical. And at the end of it, after many, many decades or centuries, we once again have a kind of a Brahminical appropriation. So, I mean, these kind of shifts that are taking place, what's the nature of this exchange? What kind of, how do we understand this? There's something dialogic here, but yet at the end of it, it's something has gone wrong. The people who have been bearers of the little traditions have had to conform eventually to those of the greater tradition, despite there being a push from them earlier. Is this the general pattern? Do we see this as a general pattern, or is it something which is, or the picture continues to be mixed? And that sort of brings me to this idea of an enemy. When we are having a dialogue, particularly with the enemy, see, the other, you have the other. Now, if you see the other as an enemy, then you're already casting her or him in a form where no dialogue is possible. The enemy is a term which he's to be eliminated. It's a term which is more kind of it's a term of the warrior. It's a warlike, it's more a metaphor from wars. The enemy is not, enemy has to be subjugated. And if he has to be killed, so be it. If he has to be expelled, so be it. Now that's not, so the other is not how do we continue to engage with someone who we recognize the other without turning that person into an enemy is the crucial question. Not to have you can't have a dialogue with an enemy. So how can you turn the enemy into a different, just a different person who at least one can have dialogue with? And even though there are vast class and caste differences between the two, I mean, and even when the other, now I'm talking from the point of view of the subaltern. Supposing I am a subaltern who is willing to engage in a dialogue. Now, what are the conditions under which this dialogue is going to take place when the other is actually hell-bent upon seeing me as somebody to be subjugated? And I'm kind of ready for a dialogue with that person. I mean, how do we envisage something like this, right? It's easy for somebody who has all the power to step down a little from his power position and to enter into a dialogue at his will when he thinks the conditions are ripe. He sort of says, well, I don't see this guy as an enemy. I can talk to him. But how do I, who have been suppressed all this while, how am I to get up and say, I want to have a dialogue with you? It's very difficult for me to imagine that. And I wish it was possible. I wish that something like this could take place. So once again, I think dialogue by its very nature is antithetical to this language, to war, to violence. It doesn't have to be rational, but it has to be open and reasonable, where there is the availability of a space for mutual influence and mutual change, right? I don't think that that Shiva could have entered the Brahminical imagination without without this mutual openness. But I think that somewhere it's turned it so sour that Shiva has just become an upper caste god from whom the lower castes are. I mean, they can't even worship Shiva in so many temples. The tribals, they can't get there. So what is this? How do we theorize all that in your? And I think the bowl example that has been taken in your book and which Deepa explicated very eloquently. I think we see the same thing happening there. So I think if you could just enlighten us a little about this. There's shifts which are taking place, even though with all the risks. I mean, do we anticipate this? And I don't want to get into this theory, social imaginary. That's a fascinating issue that you raised, but that will take us in a totally different direction. I don't think we have the time for it. But I think maybe we should have another seminar, another workshop, where we can read your work a little more carefully and also think a little about this pre-theoretical, but bringing Taylor and Gramsci into some kind of a dialogue, which will be productive of a new idea, different from both, even though it takes something from both, and particularly because Taylor works with a simple elite people distinction. The kind of differentiations that are possible from a Gramscian framework. I think those, if we introduce, we'll get a very interesting and productive session from that. But that is a completely separate thing. I think if you could just, both of you, if you could just dwell a little about the issue that I raised, at least for my learning, if not for everybody, I think that would be good, and that would be you can both have the final word, and then we will end the workshop, this marvelous set of presentations today. So Arun and Deepa, please.
Deepa, you can start.
You have to unmute yourself.
Professor Patnaik, why don't you respond first? I don't have much more to say, so you should respond.
Okay. Fine. So actually, Rajeev asked two questions. One about the Brahminical cultural hegemony. Second was about the enemy and dialogue situation. Let me take this Brahminical cultural hegemony first. See, take Jagannath cult or Krishna cult. I'll give example of Krishna cult, because Jagannath cult has not gone through this kind of metamorphosis. Krishna cult in Krishna, there is a beautiful Krishna temple, an ancient temple, built by Adi Shankaracharya, actually, long back. So it's ancient, very ancient, post-Buddha, actually. And in Bangalore, Krishna temple used to be controlled by Brahmins. Brahmin rituals, Brahmin priests, and denial of temple entry to Dalits, lower caste, and so on and so forth. So, over a period of time, OBCs could make entry, but they prevented Dalits making an entry to the temple. In 1990s, the former Chief Minister of Karnataka initiated dialogue. So Dalits couldn't. The dialogue continued for 10 years. By 2000, Dalits not merely entered Christian temple in Bangalore, they are now priests. Point is, Dalits have such aspirations, and for those who believe in abstract God, they may denounce this. This is what, so what? Fine, but question is, those who don't believe in that, Gandhi never didn't believe in temple, but they said we should respect temple form of worship. If you go by Gandhi Nehru model rather than Rabindranath Tagore's model, which I mentioned, Deepa also referred, there is room for temple form of worship. If temple form of worship has to stay, religious common sense has to continue for a longer period of time until everybody becomes atheist, everybody gives up religion. That is a different issue. Religion withers away. I would be happy if it can happen. But question is, the dialogue persisted for 10 years and he managed to craft a group of people and brought Dalits together, OBCs together, and managed. I don't know, actually, I want to study. I gave that project to one of my students. He could not do his PhD work. As a post PhD, at least do a research on this, because we need to study how, through dialogue, this kind of conflict or domination of Brahmins could be contained, could be curbed, and how the Dalit power could be exercised in the temple, and they are now temple. They co-share priesthood with Brahmins. It's a remarkable transformation that happened in Christian temple in Bangalore. I'm talking city of Bangalore. Experience this transformation. So therefore, this I'm optimistic about dialogue. Person is that nobody wants to take risk on dialogue. Nobody. Let me take Jagannath temple case. Jagannath temple Brahminical culture is there. I agree, but it's not thoroughly Brahminical. I give you an example. When the chariot moves on Rathayatra day of Rathayatra, chariot comes out. Jagannath comes out. Jagannath stops abruptly at one place. Chariot, please imagine that Jagannath wants us to stop here. So they stop. That place belongs to Salabeg, a Dalit Pujari of Jagannath, a Dalit devotee of Jagannath, Dalit Muslim devotee. His father was Muslim and mother was Dalit. So we call Dalit Muslim, devotee of Jagannath. And they are his songs are so famous. The Brahmin and Dalit intellectuals of Odisha would recite them favorably. The point is that
Arun, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, and particularly because but ultimately, it doesn't change the social respect of a Dalit Muslim in Odisha, because it is incorporated within that. It's now become part of the Brahminical will. Brahmins have conceded because of their acknowledgement that that there is a lot of Dalit and a Muslim contribution to the building of this cult. So the Brahmins acknowledge that and move on, and it doesn't alter anything in Odisha. The Brahminical hegemony, the social hegemony of Brahmins remains. This kind of hierarchical respect remains. These guys have to defer, and these guys have to be respected. So I think that doesn't change. So in that sense, it is fully kind of part of the Brahminical system, which is willing to concede a little to the Dalit Muslim. So I think that's now how it must have started, right? Jagannath, the whole Jagannath cult must have been. I mean, that original encounter, which was dialogic, has given way now, unfortunately, to something quite different. And I think that is the process and I think another process must begin now, dialogical, because it cannot be done by counter violence, and that won't work. Yeah. So we have no option.
No, but Rajeev, my argument is, for example, the history provides us opportunities for dialogue, yet we have not used that forum. Salabeg gives a counterpoint, yet the left liberal forces have not used that space. That is my argument in the book.
Right.
We're given out the space, the result that space is still dominated by Brahminical forces. Like former Chief Minister of Karnataka, what he did, initiated dialogue deliberately and mobilized all other people, came together and then broke the ice.
We are together on that. Yes, I agree
So that's
with
the
you.
point. Point is, here we have not done any counter-hegemonic work. There we have done some counter-hegemonic. In Bangalore, we did some counter-hegemonic work. In Puri, we have done any counter-hegemonic work. We have to blame ourselves, not the other side. The point is, here, this is where we learn from bowls. We have to also be introspective. Where we have gone wrong. We can't simply go on blaming other side all the time for Brahminism, for this, that. We have not done anything to contribute to counter-hegemony, to democratizing that space. We are now reappropriating that space, which is being dominated by Brahmins. Then why are you blaming them all the time? That's where I am critical of us, because we should be self-critical as well, not simply criticize the other side. The second point about enemy and dialogue is interesting point you made. See, for example, look, the idea of enemy, I agree that idea of enemy and dialogue don't go gel together. But the question is, in some events, some situation like Kandhamal, where people treat each other as enemy, they are forced to reconcile with each other. Why? And why when they reconcile, the idea of enemy gets transformed as a friend. Friendship was there in the pre-given condition. That in between friendship was given up, enmity was established. And then enmity led to a situation where people were pushed to the wall. Then they realized that they can't break the wall. They have to come for a dialogue, come for a discussion. How this happened, how enemies, today's friends become enemies, how today's enemies become friends. That is my story I told in my chapter on Kandhamal. Here, Christians and look at the four sections. One, RSS, people supporting RSS, BHP on the one hand, the tribes and castes also, and OBC so on and so forth. Then Dalit Christians, Dalits, Bayala Dalits supporting Christians, church. Now you have four was RSS versus church and tribes versus Dalits. Now in this four set contradiction, one notices the dialectic between friendship, enmity, and friendship goes on. So therefore, this process is interesting because there, when people are, as Gandhi says, you are pressed to the wall. Then you realize that you have no way to go further. You realize where we're going wrong. What path we travel, we reached a dead end, and we can't go further. That realization is very important, Rajeev. That's what Bowles tell you. Bowles tell you that self-realization is ultimate realization.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't know your mistakes. You can't know where you are going. You can't know what path you are traveling. Nobody else can make you realize. You must realize that yourself. So this is how enemies become friends in Kandhamal. There are pro RSS people, there are pro church people. They told each other, they went to RSS office, told church, we are going for dialogue. If you don't support us, hell with you. They said openly, hell with you. Then they said, if you are going for dialogue, why are we to oppose? Go carry on. And both the fellows won't tell you this story. Both church and RSS won't tell you that dialogue actually happened by forcing them for reconciliation. That story is only told by me.
So Arun, before I come to Deepa, I have a little confession to make, and then I'll come to. So first of all, I had a call from. Now I'm explaining what happened. It's a massive joke that I played on myself today. I didn't know that Sagar and Vikash were the same persons. So Vikash called me, and I kept getting messages from somebody called Sagar, Vikash, and I thought, ye pata nahi kaun hai. I never looked at those messages because when he called me, he said, I'm Vikash. So now, and even now it says Vikash Kumar. So I thought, अरे ये तो कुछ नहीं हुआ अब, आज कुछ नहीं है. तो मैं आराम से, I woke up. I had a talk at the IIC. I finished at 4. I was completely tired. I went to sleep, and I woke up just around 5 o'clock, and with my cup of tea, and I realized, and then I got a call. I said, "Ye kya?" I said, "My God, ye kya ho gaya?" And believe it, I had another meeting at 5:30. So I had to, वो meeting शुरू हो गया, वो भी मेरे लिए करना था. तो मैंने इसको बंद किया. इसको माइक को इसको ऑफ किया और उस मीटिंग में गया, फिर उस 15 मिनट में कुछ जल्दी से बंद करके आई गॉट बैक टू यू. So it's been a real comedy of errors. I'm so sorry. It's been terrible, but it's all because I have now another meeting at 7, but this time it's physical. I have to go somewhere. So Deepa, please step in.
No, I don't have much more to say. I listened to you, Professor Bhargava, with a lot of interest, and Professor Patnaik's response. I was also thinking of the syllabic figure and what does it mean to excavate a figure or an event from history. So how do we bring that into the present? And I was just thinking, and I was thinking of an essay that I can't remember where Judith Butler talks about the terms of recognition. You might be recognized, but what are the terms of recognition? What are the frame in which we recognize the other? So I was thinking that while it is important to recover these figures, there is also there's an inherent, and I think I'm overusing the term risk, of that figure also being drawn into a more, an articulation that is conservative or regressive. So that's one thing. And I was also thinking of how, and increasingly because reflexivity, self-reflexivity is something that we use a lot in the social sciences, especially where I come from, gender studies, sociology, and so on. And increasingly, I'm thinking that we underestimate the charge or the uses of a concept. I mean, Audre Lorde has an essay called The Uses of Anger. What does it mean to have anger as a Black or a colored person? So I'm just thinking that if one were to factor in tension or irreconcilability into dialogue, and I think that also emerges quite few times in your book, that the dialogue is inherently, it is the contingent nature of dialogue, that there is dialogue today, as Professor Bhargava said, and the Brahminical elements draw from a more subaltern or tribal discourse, but that then again sort of crystallizes into something which is dominant, hegemonic, and oppressive, and Brahminical. So I think I was also thinking of a film, for example, Sairat, Nagaraj Manjule's Sairat, which many of you might have seen, and it was a film that was made in 2016, and it pushed us to think about the radicalness of love and how the forces work, which is why love must contained. Young people must be contained. But the same movie was then made 2 years later by Karan Johar as Dhadak. And you will see that the most uncomfortable elements of that dialogue, if you want to call it dialogue, how they're contained, it becomes a more class-based kind of thing. So since I look at popular culture, it just struck me. So I'm thinking that what I'm taking from this book is dialogue is important, but one also recognizes like reconciliation, which Supreme Court and Professor Patnaik, you yourself are not very satisfied with that. Because if one were to take the irreconcilability of the situation, then what might the court verdict look like? I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'll stop there. And I'll not stop Professor Bhargava from attending the next, delaying you further.
I think the slight fiasco in the beginning and also the incompleteness of this conversation compels me to propose that soon we should have another conversation on some of the themes that have been raised here. And this time I'll be a little more alert, and also I think I will not think that Sagar, if Sagar is the initiator, I wouldn't think of him as two persons, one of whom is somebody I have no idea who. So, anyway, I'm sorry about that, but I'll draw this to a close because I have to quickly run and meet my yet another commitment. But I'm very grateful to all of you for tolerating the chair, but also for giving excellent presentations, and Arun for having written this very, very interesting book, which I should look very closely, quickly, so that I can enter with more comfort and productivity next time. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye bye. Bye, Deepa.